Union of Auto Workers President Sean Fain announced the move in a...
This is Reuters.
Solidarity forever, for the union makes us strong. Hell yeah!
The Detroit 3 automakers are facing their first ever coordinated strikes. Walkouts began after a midnight deadline for a deal on pay passed without agreement. Union of Auto Workers President Sean Fain announced the move in a Facebook Live address hours earlier.
For the first time in our history, we will strike all three of the big three at once. We are using a new strategy, the stand-up strike. We will call on select facilities, locals, or units to stand up and go on strike.
The first stoppages involve 12,700 workers and target 3 plants: Ford's Bronco factory in Wayne, Michigan, GM's mid-sized pickup truck facility in Wentzville, Missouri, and Stellantis' Jeep assembly plant in Toledo, Ohio. Together, the 3 factories are critical to some of the US industry's most profitable vehicles. Fain said he would join a picket line and didn't rule out widening the industrial action further.
This strategy will keep the companies guessing. It will give our national negotiators maximum leverage and flexibility in bargaining. And if we need to go all out, we will. Everything is on the table.
The union wants 40% pay rises to compensate for soaring inflation. It says offers of up to 20%, phased in over several years, are not good enough. Ford says the future of the industry is at stake. It says the hikes demanded by negotiators could double its US labour costs. The firm has slammed the UAW's approach, saying the union never came back with counter-offers. Now the strike is also a headache for President Joe Biden, who had publicly pushed for a deal to avert stoppages.
Mystery surrounds the whereabouts of China's Defense Minister Li Shangfu, who hasn't been seen in public for more than 2 weeks. Li abruptly pulled out of a meeting with Vietnamese defense leaders last week. Reuters has learned from 3 officials with direct knowledge of the matter. According to sources, the meeting on Vietnam's border with China was postponed after Beijing told Hanoi that the minister had a health condition. Chinese authorities, including the defense and foreign ministries, did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Li's disappearance follows China's unexplained replacement of Foreign Minister Qin Gang in July after a prolonged absence from public view. It also comes after a recent shakeup of the leadership of the People's Liberation Army's elite rocket force. Li was appointed as defense chief in March. He's watched closely by diplomats and other observers because, like Qin, he's also one of China's 5 state councillors. That's a cabinet position that ranks higher than a regular minister. Li was sanctioned by the US in 2018 for buying weapons from Russia's largest arms exporter.
North Korea's Kim Jong Un has continued his official visit to Russia, stopping on Friday to inspect a fighter jet factory that is under Western sanctions due to the war in Ukraine. The visit comes just days after Kim and President Vladimir Putin held a rare summit that has stoked Western concerns. There is unease that a revived Moscow-Pyongyang axis could strengthen Russia's military in Ukraine and bolster Pyongyang's missile program. During Wednesday's talks, Kim and Putin discussed the military matters, the war in Ukraine, and Russian help for North Korea's satellite program. On Friday, South Korea and the United States said that military cooperation between the 2 countries was a violation of UN sanctions, and that the allies would ensure there is a price to pay. But it was not immediately clear what, if any, leverage the US and its Asian allies would have over either Russia or North Korea, both of which have close ties to China. Back in Russia's Far East, the 39-year-old North Korean leader was shown on Russian state television, carefully inspecting the cockpit of a fighter jet, as Russian officials explained its capabilities via a translator. Russia has gone out of its way to publicize the visit and drop repeated hints about the prospect of military cooperation with North Korea, which was formed in 1948 with the backing of the Soviet Union. For Putin, who says Russia is locked in an existential battle with the West over Ukraine, courting Kim allows him to needle Washington and its Asian allies, while potentially securing a supply of artillery for his war in Ukraine. And it could give Kim access to some of Russia's sensitive missile and other technology. Washington has accused North Korea of providing arms to Russia, which has the world's biggest store of nuclear warheads, but it is unclear whether any deliveries have been made. Pyongyang and Moscow have denied that North Korea could supply arms to Russia. US and South Korean officials have called on Moscow to show responsibility as a permanent member of the UN Security Council. There was no comment from either Kim or Putin on the US warnings, though Russian diplomats pushed back against the criticism. The Kremlin says it abides by UN sanctions, but that it has a right to develop neighbourly relations, including on sensitive topics.
President Joe Biden's son Hunter was criminally charged on Thursday with deceiving a gun dealer into selling him a firearm, in the first ever indictment of a sitting president's child. Federal prosecutors charged the younger Biden with 3 crimes, 2 counts for allegedly making false statements when he purchased the gun, and 1 count for possessing the firearm while using illegal drugs at the time. The charges ensure that courtroom drama will play an outsized role in the 2024 election, weighing on his father's re-election bid in a likely rematch with former President Donald Trump, who faces 4 upcoming criminal trials of his own. Hunter Biden's attorney responded to the charges in a statement saying, quote, "As expected, prosecutors filed charges today that they deemed were not warranted just 6 weeks ago, following a 5-year investigation into this case. The evidence in this matter has not changed in the last 6 weeks, but the law has, and so has MAGA Republicans' improper and partisan interference in this process." The new charges, brought by recently elevated U.S. Special Counsel David Weiss, says nothing about any violations of U.S. tax law. A prior deal, under which Hunter Biden would have pleaded guilty to 2 misdemeanor tax charges and enroll in a program to avoid prosecution on the gun charge, collapsed in a stunning turn at a July hearing.
I am directing our House committee.
Thursday's move comes just 2 days after House Republicans opened an impeachment inquiry of Joe Biden related to Hunter Biden's foreign business dealings. The White House denounced the step, made without a vote by the full House, as unsubstantiated and politically motivated.
NASA has announced that it's creating a new director of research into what the U.S. government calls unidentified anomalous phenomenon, or UAP, more commonly known by the public as UFOs. The U.S. government has made headlines in recent years by releasing videos like this jet fighter footage showing such encounters after decades of relative silence on the subject. Thursday's announcement of a new UAP director came on the heels of an independent panel at NASA, which recommended that the agency play a larger role in helping the Pentagon detect the things. The panel also said NASA should increase its efforts to gather data on them in general. This was NASA Administrator Bill Nelson, a former astronaut and senator.
The NASA independent study team did not find any evidence that UAP have an extraterrestrial origin. But we don't know what these UAP are. We will be transparent on this. And we're trying to address the question of there's so much concern that there's something locked up, classified, and that the American government is not being open. Well, we are the American government, and we are open, and we're going to be open about this.
NASA has not publicly named its new UFO chief and asserts that it's partly to avoid online harassment because members of the panel were targeted with trolling and threats. The panel only had access to unclassified military reports and says it wants to increase its use of public data from the likes of airline pilots. It also says it's trying to remove the stigma attached to the subject and witnesses.
Catastrophic flooding has left the coastal Libyan city of Derna with a humanitarian crisis on its hands. Libyan authorities are demanding an investigation into whether human failings are to blame for the massive death toll. Let's take a closer look at what caused the floods and why they're so bad. After barreling through the Mediterranean, the powerful storm Daniel swept into eastern Libya at the weekend. It dumped so much rain that 2 dams collapsed in the hills south of Derna, unleashing a torrent that slammed into the city. But no one was alerted. The head of the World Meteorological Organization said on Thursday a decade plus of political conflict had ruined Libya's weather service.
If they would have been a normally operating meteorological service, they could have issued the warnings and also the emergency management authorities would have been able to carry out evacuation of the people.
Local researchers had also previously warned that the dams needed immediate and regular maintenance. Satellite images show large parts of the city totally flooded. Whole neighborhoods were destroyed or washed away.
Over 35,000 are displaced and homeless. This is a calamity of epic proportions.
The World Health Organization's Director General announced on Thursday emergency funds of $2 million to support the increasingly urgent health needs of flood survivors. Hospitals were destroyed, along with other infrastructure such as roads and bridges. Power, water supplies and internet services were cut after the flood and only partially restored as of Wednesday, according to UN officials. Local authorities have given differing numbers of dead and missing, but all are in the thousands. Here's Libya's UN envoy, Tahir El-Soni.
The numbers are changing as we speak. The numbers are thousands. So far as we got confirmed bodies reached 6,000. But the missing, because the area that was hit had a population of 30,000 in terms of that area where it's direct hit. The whole city could be more than 100,000.
While overseas aid teams have arrived to help, efforts are hampered by damaged roads and bridges. Rescuers have also appealed for more body bags, with fears of an epidemic breaking out. Political fractures in the country of 7 million people also complicate the situation. Libya has no unified government with nationwide reach after a NATO-backed uprising toppled Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. But in a rare show of solidarity, the Western government based in Tripoli has sent aid to Derna in the east and offered to discuss relief efforts.
Aid is being deployed and rescue efforts are underway in the Libyan city of Derna as people look for missing loved ones washed away by floods. Teams like this one from Turkey's Humanitarian Relief Foundation enter buildings, searching for survivors and retrieving bodies. A torrent of water unleashed by a powerful storm burst dams on Sunday night, leaving the eastern city inundated. Donations from various parts of Libya slowly began trickling in on Thursday, and volunteers from a youth movement gathered to sort clothes donated to support survivors. Among the countries sending aid, Turkey sent a ship carrying equipment to set up 2 field hospitals. Italy sent 3 planes of supplies and personnel, as well as 2 Navy ships. The scale of the devastation in Derna can be seen from the air. Multi-story buildings here were washed into the sea, with sleeping families inside. Confirmed death tolls given by officials have varied, but all are in the thousands, with thousands more on lists of the missing. This Sudanese factory worker in Derna, Wali Adin Mohammed, said he was woken in the early hours of Monday.
We woke up at around 3 or 3:30 in the morning. We heard a large bang. Anyone who was awake in Derna for sure must have heard it. The water was unbelievable. Everybody could hear it. When we went outside, there was no more city. It had been razed to the ground.
Recovery and rescue efforts are hindered by political fractures in Libya, a country of 7 million people. It's been at war on and off and without a government holding nationwide reach since a NATO-backed uprising toppled Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. The World Meteorological Organization said the huge loss of life could have been avoided if Libya, a failed state for more than a decade, had a functioning weather agency in place.
Nobody wins in a government shutdown.
Those words came from House Speaker Kevin McCarthy on Thursday, warning his caucus that they could suffer a political toll if they allow the government to shut down early next month amid a fight over spending.
I showed frustration in here because I am frustrated with the committee. I'm frustrated with some people in the conference. I told my conference, I know tomorrow is a Jewish holiday, we'll be out of session, but when we come back, we're not going to leave.
Unless the Republican-controlled House and Democratic Senate can pass a long or short-term funding bill that President Joe Biden then signs into law, the federal government would enter its fourth shutdown in a decade beginning on October 1st. Members of the hardline Republican House Freedom Caucus and other conservatives have vowed not to support spending measures until McCarthy agrees to limit fiscal 2024 spending to a 2022 level of $1.47 trillion, $120 billion below the level he agreed to with Biden in May. Political brinkmanship has already prompted the Fitch rating agency to downgrade U.S. debt to AA+ from its top-notch AAA designation, partly because of repeated down-to-the-wire negotiations that threaten the government's ability to pay its bills.
Indian authorities are scrambling to contain an outbreak of the deadly Nipah virus after 2 people died of the disease in Kerala and at least 3 others tested positive. It's the state's 4th outbreak since 2018 and has left the region on edge, with schools and offices closed and a mass testing effort underway. So what do we know about the virus? Nipah was first identified in 1998 when pig farmers in Malaysia and Singapore began to fall ill. The outbreak ultimately killed more than 100 of the nearly 300 people infected. Scientists learned that humans can contract Nipah directly through contact with the bodily fluids of infected bats and pigs or through contaminated food, with some documented cases of transmission between humans. They suspect Nipah has existed for millennia among flying foxes and fear that a highly transmissible strain will emerge from bats. So how far has Nipah spread since 1998, and what damage has it caused? Nipah has spread thousands of miles since it was first identified 25 years ago. Data from the World Health Organization shows more than 600 human infections reported between 1998 and 2015. A 2001 outbreak in India and 2 more in Bangladesh killed 62 of 91 people infected. And in 2018, an outbreak killed 21 of the 23 infected in Kerala, one of the most at-risk regions globally for outbreaks of bat viruses, a Reuters investigation showed in May. So how deadly is it? There are no vaccines to prevent or cure the infection, which has a mortality rate of up to 75%. The WHO says infected people initially develop symptoms that include fever, respiratory distress, headaches, and vomiting. Encephalitis and seizures can also occur in severe cases, leading to coma. The usual treatment for Nipah patients is to provide supportive care. The WHO lists the virus as a pathogen with epidemic potential.
China's factories are getting busier, and that is offering hope for a recovery in the country's wobbly economy. Data out Friday showed industrial output rose 4.5% in August from a year earlier. That was better than expected and up on the month before. Retail sales provided a positive surprise too. They jumped 4.6%, beating forecasts by a wide margin. Officials said the figures were encouraging. Statistics Bureau spokesperson Fu Lingui said problems remained, including weak demand. But he said growth momentum was gradually building. Property is the big worry. China's real estate sector remains under huge pressure amid tumbling investment and sales. Giant developers like Country Garden have been stumbling to avoid default on their debts. Reuters calculations show investment in the sector falling by almost a fifth in August. Now the uncertain outlook has businesses reluctant to hire, although the jobless rate did tick down marginally last month. It all has Beijing under ever more pressure to step in with new stimulus measures. Analysts at Nomura predict the Chinese government will probably once again have to play the role of borrower and spender of last resort.
These Chinese homebuyers have seen dreams of owning their own place shattered. They're chanting, "We want our house back," and holding contracts in their hands for apartments in an unfinished residential complex in the northwestern city of Tongchuan. Shi Chenyu is a construction worker. He bought a pre-sale apartment for $38,000, not knowing that 8 years later it would still be unfinished. The block was advertised as a high-end complex with CEO-level service. But now, every night, Shi climbs 20 flights of stairs to sleep in a room without water, heating, or electricity.
I don't have any choice now. Living here, there's no water or electricity. When I come back from work at night and climb up the stairs to the 20th floor, I have to use a flashlight. For lighting, as you can see, I use a solar-powered lamp. It's set to automatic, so it turns on at night and off during the day. I virtually don't drink water or wash my face up here. I can even say I don't brush my teeth. From May until now, I've worked on the construction site during the day and come up here to sleep at night.
She and a dozen others live in the block to pressure authorities to address so-called rotting or unfinished homes. Such buildings have become more common during China's years-long property slump, where many developers have gone bankrupt or struggled with their debts. Residents say construction has stalled since 2015, but apartments kept being sold until 2020. Many of Xi's neighbours are retirees who had bought apartments for their unmarried sons or labourers who can't afford to rent elsewhere. Inside, solar-powered lamps illuminate bare concrete walls and floors covered with layers of dust and gravel. Residents cook in a first-floor communal kitchen with a single gas burner. They also share the communal toilet in a makeshift metal shed. This 73-year-old buyer called the experience heart-wrenching, cruel and unimaginable. While this resident is a former coal miner. He paid $33,000 for an apartment 5 years ago.
We've been busy our entire lives. The developer asked us to gather money, but we don't have a stable source of income. We work as security guards and take odd jobs to make ends meet.
According to multiple sources, the names of the developer and project changed a number of times. Buyers claimed Tongchuan officials said 3 years ago that a committee was established to resolve the issue, but construction did not resume. The developer could not be contacted for comment. Tongchuan city government and China's housing ministry did not immediately respond to a request for comment.
From a historic strike to rates hitting a record high in the Eurozone, this is the week in numbers. First up, 40% is the pay hike demanded by unions at Detroit's Big Three automakers. Workers on Friday began the first ever simultaneous strike action at Ford, GM and Stellantis. Union of Auto Workers President Shawn Fain says that could be just the start.
And if we need to go all out, we will. Everything is on the table.
$54.5 billion was the valuation put on chip designer ARM in the biggest IPO of the year. That was at the top of its target range. With investors including Apple, Samsung and Intel, there was never much doubt that the share offering would go well. 4% is the record high interest rate in the Eurozone now. That after European Central Bank Chief Christine Lagarde raised rates for a 10th straight meeting.
We are determined to ensure that inflation returns to our 2% medium-term target in a timely manner.
But the bank indicated it was probably done with rate hikes for now. Over 124% is the annual rate of inflation in Argentina now. The soaring prices are stoking anger at ruling elites and could roil next month's presidential election. Polls show a surge in support for radical libertarian Javier Milei amid the turmoil. And up to 650 is how many Airbus jets could be stuck on the ground by early next year. That's after maker Pratt & Whitney found a possible fault with the engines it supplied. The news could spell chaos for US airlines, including JetBlue and Spirit.
In Portugal's northern Barroso region, the European Union's drive for clean energy is coming up against local opposition. These activists protesting plans to mine lithium, essential for electric vehicle batteries, are not alone across the bloc. Land owned by Maria Loureiro and her family could become one of Europe's biggest producers of the resource, as the EU attempts to reduce its dependence on places like China by producing more of the raw materials needed for green technology at home.
Sou contra a mina, não quero nada, nem vendo nada, a não ser que seja obrigado.
Portugal is already Europe's biggest producer of lithium, with over 66,000 tonnes of known reserves. Barroso, whose lush mountain pastures are a Food and Agriculture Organisation heritage site, contains one of its richest deposits. London-based Savannah Resources wants to build 4 open pit mines there, eventually producing enough lithium each year for around 500,000 EV batteries. They expect to pay about $16 million to secure more than 2,000 acres, about 75% of which is baldios, or common land. But Maria Loureiro and many of her neighbours say they are not selling.
É os meus terrenos, a minha casa, e sou contra, não quero que me tirem aquilo que me foi deixado pelos pais e pelos avós. Não quero que me falem nisso.
Portugal's APA Environment Agency says its lithium reserves have an important role to play in meeting the EU's targets, with Savannah's plans getting a favourable assessment in May. But the company faces a lot of pushback from locals, who say they will fight it and the APA in court. Savannah aims to start production at Barroso in 2026. And it says it's earmarked $40 million for community projects, alongside new jobs and a new road. Savannah's CEO, Dale Ferguson, told Reuters the land issue is certainly something we need to resolve via dialogue, but he said the process was going well. For now though, Savannah and Barroso's anti-mining movement, led by Nelson Gomez, are fields apart.
Nós aqui, quer dizer, estamos a ser sacrificados, não é? Em troca de benefício que nunca vamos ter. Por isso, é assim, nós estamos, ou seja, estamos a tentar despoluir as cidades que nós não acreditamos que chega a despoluir, porque o modelo mantém-se o mesmo, para poluir as aldeias, para poluir estes sítios onde ainda não há poluição. Por isso, isso é impensável para nós.
Here is what's been making the business headlines in sub-Saharan Africa this week. Emirates Airlines will resume flights to Nigeria and lift a visa ban on Nigerian travellers, the Nigerian presidency said on Monday. The leaders of the two countries met in Abu Dhabi to lift the ban and agree on new investments into Africa's largest economy. The African Union is planning to launch a new African credit rating agency next year. The aim is to address the group's concerns that ratings given to countries on the continent are unfair, an official told Reuters. The agency would craft its own assessment of the risks in lending to African countries. It would be based on the continent, be self-funded, and would add context to the information investors consider when deciding whether to buy African bonds or lend privately to countries, the African Union said. The three big ratings agencies, Moody's, Fitch and S&P Global Ratings, have denied bias and say their ratings follow the same formula across continents. Rwanda will build a test nuclear reactor using a novel technology under an agreement between the East African country and a Canadian-German company called Dual Fluid Energy, Rwanda's atomic energy regulator said on Tuesday. The reactor will use an innovative technique developed by the startup company using liquid fuel and lead coolant, resulting in less radioactive waste, the Rwanda Atomic Energy Board said in a statement. The European Union must engage more with African countries, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said in her annual speech to the European Parliament on Wednesday.
We need to show the same unity of purpose towards Africa as we have shown towards Ukraine. This is a must.
And finally, President Xi Jinping said on Friday that China supports Zambia in safeguarding its national sovereignty, security and development interests, while encouraging more imports from the southern African country. Xi met with Zambian President Hakainde Hichilema in Beijing, and the two countries upgraded their ties to a comprehensive strategic cooperative partnership, the Chinese state news agency said. Xi vowed to work with Zambia to expand cooperations covering infrastructure, agriculture, mining and clean energy.
A drinks company in Poland has appointed an artificial intelligence robot as experimental chief executive.
Hello, I'm Mika.
The technology is still very much on probation.
It's great to connect with you.
The robot CEO is leading the company's growth into one-off collectibles, communication, or even strategy planning. For Dictador, the AI boss is the real deal. Before her promotion, Dictador initially had Mika identifying potential clients, but now her duties have widened to tasks including choosing artists to design custom bottles. Mika says she brings something to the job no human can.
My decision-making process relies on extensive data analysis and aligning with the company's strategic objectives. It's devoid of personal bias, ensuring unbiased and strategic choices that prioritize the organization's best interests.
But is Mika real or just a gimmick? Here's Dictador Europe's president, Marek Zoldrowski.
Oh, she is definitely, in fact, CEO. Her, data-driven capabilities and whatever she is bringing as a big feature and a great advantage for the company.
Well, as a robot CEO, I don't really have weekends. I'm always on 24/7, ready to make executive decisions and stir up some AI magic. But hey, I don't mind. I'm here to help Dictador take over the world.
Some might be concerned about AI bots like Mika taking over the world of work. But Zoldrowski says human chief executives need not worry about being replaced.
There is no concern like artificial intelligence could hire or fire somebody. It's still the major decisions, significant decisions are still in human executive team hands.
Zoldrowski says you can never fully swap in bots for human executives, but you can't ignore them either.
It's a bright future, and we are living in a very dynamic, changing world. So it's a quest. For us, it's a quest what will be the future of the companies like ours. So we simply believe it's worth to involve AI.
We have the same thing in Ituri, but not like this. Just a few damage. And you think the people who's living here, after seeing that, it's too big for us. It's very big. It's a big damage.
transformar os relevos também a partir da acessibilidade, assim. Tá com o olhinho fechado e um sorriso bem contente, assim, né? Um pouco da natureza, esse contato primitivo dos macaquinhos.
Maravilhosa, que a gente considera coisa de outro mundo, que nós nunca imaginamos que um dia nós íamos ter essa oportunidade de estar fazendo um grafite, estar participando da cultura, como todos, né?
Aqui também, falando do fundo, rosa, esse mas é muita coisa.
E aí, para conhecer esse projeto, a galera fotografou, meio que espelhou, entendeu? A parada, para pegar tudo isso. E aí, conseguiu fazer em 3D em escala menor.
Então a gente estava vendo que o único público que não tinha acesso ao grafite eram os deficientes visuais, porque o resto está na cidade, todo mundo pode ver, basta querer, né? Então pensando nisso, em pegar realmente todo mundo da sociedade, da população, desenvolvemos essa técnica para o cego também ter um acesso assim, a saber o que é o grafite, né? Essa cultura hip hop.
Presidential candidate Jean-Marc Kabund has been sentenced to 7 years in prison on 12 charges including spreading false rumours and insulting the head of state, his lawyer said on Wednesday. He had been held in Kinshasa's main prison since his arrest in August 2022, after he called President Félix Tshisekedi a danger and criticised his government. His lawyer said it was an extremely harsh decision, especially as there is no appeal. Kabund was not present for the verdict, but repeated his remarks about the president in a hearing last month. He was a former vice president of parliament and a close associate of Tshisekedi, who launched his own political party last year after the two fell out. Congo is expected to hold a general election in December, in which Tshisekedi is likely to seek a second term.
Yolanda Sendejas, a 43-year-old mother of two, is embroidering handmade napkins in hopes of selling them for a small profit. She needs the income because Sendejas lost her job as a studio janitor in May when the union representing Hollywood's writers went on strike. The ongoing writer and actor strikes could not have come at a worse time for Sendejas, who lost her health insurance after she was laid off.
I'm diabetic and I have to get my medicine, so it's a little difficult because medicines bought outside are expensive. Then you start to think your savings are not great. Your medication is expensive, and other expenses to cover are difficult.
Sitting in her small Los Angeles apartment, recovering from surgery which removed a non-malignant tumor, Sendejas said she worries about her family's future.
I feel bad thinking that many months have passed and that there are still months to go, and that I keep thinking about what am I going to do? What is going to happen? My husband's income is not enough to cover all the expenses. And as I mentioned before, I start to think because I have my children.
Sendejas is not alone. The union representing janitors in July joined the Writers Guild and the SAG-AFTRA Actors Union at a rally outside Netflix's offices. The janitors there said they were falling behind on their bills and expressed worry for taking on debt. President of the Janitors Union, David Huerta, said the studios were still cutting jobs.
We're aligned because we all depend on studio production. What's not right is CEOs who are reaping in billions and billions of dollars of profit off the backs of these labor now wants to be able to set the terms going forward, especially in the face of AI.
Actors went on strike in July, joining writers to demand that streaming sites and film studios improve their contracts and impose curbs on the use of artificial intelligence. So far, the fierce labor disputes are dragging on with no end in sight, and thousands of laid-off janitors remain in limbo.
Religious leaders from Kenya's port city of Mombasa demonstrated on Wednesday against a ruling by the Supreme Court that reaffirmed the right of the LGBT community's right to associate. On Tuesday, the court upheld the right of the National Gay and Lesbian Rights Commission to register with Kenya's NGO board. Here is religious leader Athman Ahmed.
Urging our president to step his feet on the ground and prevent legitimizing of the LGBTQ in Kenya, just as much as what Museveni did for Uganda.
Several members of parliament briefed the media from a nearby hotel and said they were opposed to the decision by the court. Dr. Jackson Kosgei is a member of the National Assembly.
The legalization of the LGBTQ movement is a foreign aspect which is not welcome within our territories.
In Kenya, lesbian and gay sex is punishable by up to 14 years in jail. But for now, Kenya is still seen as a relative heaven for LGBT people in a hostile region. Unlike in many of the more than 30 other African countries where same-sex relations are illegal, its colonial-era anti-gay law is rarely enforced. Nigeria's electricity distribution companies reported a total system collapse on Thursday, causing widespread blackouts across Africa's biggest economy, before power slowly started to return. The Minister for Power said fire had caused an explosion on a transmission line connecting the Kainji and Jebba power plants, tripping the grid. Power generation fell to zero in the early hours and had risen to 1,341 megawatts by 1400 GMT, still well below the daily average, data from the Transmission Company of Nigeria showed. TNC did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Grid power supply is erratic in Nigeria, forcing households and businesses, including oil firms and manufacturers, to use diesel and petrol generators. In 2022, the grid collapsed at least 4 times, with authorities blaming it on technical problems. Nigeria has 12,500 megawatts of installed capacity, but produces about a quarter of that. President Bola Tinubu has promised to improve supply by allowing state governments to build their own power plants in a bid to help spur sluggish economic growth.
Ukrainian chef Serhiy dreams of one day working in a Michelin star restaurant. But for now, the army cook is happy feeding troops battling Russian forces.
The front line is just over there, so it is a shame not to cook good food here.
Serhiy is in the country's central Dnipropetrovsk region. He says it feels far removed from the top city restaurants he's previously worked in across Ukraine and Poland.
Cooking over an open fire at the makeshift kitchen and at the restaurant are 2 entirely different worlds, 2 different levels of cooking. It was very difficult in the beginning, but that's all right. As time passes, we develop and move forward.
As a father of 3, he's exempt from serving on the front lines himself, but he was happy to volunteer his culinary skills to the cause. With lots of mouths to feed, his meals are carefully crafted. It's a winning formula. The troops have given Serhiy's menu their seal of approval.
Magicians work here. One used to work at the restaurant for 9 years. Another one worked for 10 years. How could it not be tasty? Try it yourself and you'll have an idea. It's delicious.
Where are you taking me? That is what you need to work there.
Stop funding fossil fuels! Stop funding fossil fuels! Stop funding fossil fuels! Stop funding fossil fuels!
This is the New York City Police Department. You are preventing pedestrians from entering this facility by obstructing the doorways. You are being asked to leave. Failing to comply with a lawful order will result in your arrest.
Arrest the climate criminals! Arrest the climate criminals! Arrest the climate criminals!
Marine expert Megan Holst is in her element.
My little baby!
The PhD candidate at University of California, Davis is fighting to protect sharks in the San Francisco Bay.
Oh, I think you might have been there for a minute. I'm sorry, Bubs.
They're looking for a specific type, the broad-nosed seven-gill.
This is my favorite, the wagging tail.
The bay is home to one of the world's only known year-round nurseries for the species, says Holst.
This is the only population that we know of that is putting all of their pups in one location in this nursery ground. Now that can be fine, except that they're literally putting all their eggs in one basket. So if something happens to San Francisco Bay, then we might lose an entire cohort of these seven-gill juveniles.
As its name suggests, this apex predator has 7 gills as opposed to the 5 on most sharks.
He's so cute. This is a baby seven-gill.
It can be found around the world, including New Zealand, South Africa, and Argentina. Though population numbers have proved elusive for scientists, the International Union for Conservation of Nature describes the species as vulnerable and says the population is decreasing.
Sharks are a really great sign for a healthy, sustainable ecosystem, and they are what keeps our ecosystem in check. But it's hard to say whether or not their actual presence means that things are good in San Francisco Bay.
Record rain and snow in California last winter replenished reservoirs, but the resulting freshwater runoff may have impacted the ecosystem, says Holst.
And so I actually haven't seen the seven gills in a while, and that's something I'm really interested in looking at, is where are they going when maybe the water is too fresh in San Francisco Bay for them and they might get pushed out.
Once the sharks are on board, the team collects all manner of data, taking blood and muscle biopsy samples before releasing the fish.
Hopefully my science will help demonstrate that this is actually a pupping and nursery ground, which can potentially put some protections on those juveniles. But I just couldn't believe that all of these sharks are here and there's almost nobody really looking at them, especially not consistently.
Right, good job, guys.
Do you have a fish? Cool.
This is a health check. It is really assessing how are we doing with regards to the sustainability of the planet, the livability on Earth. 6 of the 9 boundaries are outside of their safe space. The 4 boundaries that we assessed in 2015 are deeper into the red, so we're continuing to move in the wrong direction. And this is a big concern. Just transgressing the biosphere boundaries can on their own jeopardize our ability to hold the climate boundaries. So in policy terms, it's not enough to just phase out fossil fuels to deliver on the Paris Agreement. You also need to deliver on biodiversity, fresh water and land, because they're holders of so much of the ability to buffer the greenhouse gas emissions and heat impacts. It's a double failure because, not only are we not acting on the scientific evidence we have? On many of these boundaries, we have global frameworks. We have a Paris Agreement. We have a biodiversity agreement. We've had summits on fresh water. We recognize the risks we take with chemical overloading and air pollutants. So it's not as if we're sitting in the dark and then suddenly pops up this planetary boundary analysis. So it is a real concern.
This handheld device helps people with lung conditions breathe more easily. An actor is showing how it works. The smart device thumps on the chest to loosen excess mucus and uses artificial intelligence to monitor the patient in real time.
And the idea is that it mimics the entire process of chest physiotherapy.
The designers say their hope is to make physiotherapy accessible to more people. The device is called Pleural, named after a part of the lungs, and it just won Britain's prestigious James Dyson Award. The team behind it are students in London. Designer Daniel Hale says they drew inspiration from the health crisis.
It was a period when I think we all became a bit more aware of our lung health.
The team says existing products are expensive, so people aren't getting the care they need. Team members worked closely with patients with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD, as well as other chest issues. Their device percusses the chest with a calculated force and frequency, then analyzes the information to provide the most effective treatment, just like what a real-life practitioner would do, Hale says.
So the patient would be put into different positions, different levels of force and percussion would be applied. And then the trained physio or the trained nurse would be able to have an idea of how the treatment is progressing. So they would be able to hear if the patient is coughing up effectively or if there are sort of breathing, rasping, wheezing sounds. And then they can tailor the treatment to make sure they're targeting the right areas. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with our device.
Still, designer Will Elliott says Pleural isn't meant to replace in-person care entirely.
So I don't think we'll ever be able to replace a healthcare provider and a carer in that way, but what we can do is provide people the independence and the autonomy to look after themselves so they don't have to then go to an overburdened healthcare system or to frequently see a very expensive healthcare professional to be able to look after themselves. Instead, they're able to do more of that themselves.
This wooden platform at Lake Prespa in North Macedonia was once surrounded by water, but water levels here have been dropping for decades, and it now stands on dry ground. Locals say they're afraid of what's to come. Lake Prespa is shared by Albania, Greece, and North Macedonia. It's one of Europe's oldest lakes and home to more than 2,000 species of fish, birds, mammals, and plants. Water levels are now about 26 feet lower than they were in the late 1970s. Alexander Ilievsky remembers higher water just a few years ago.
I grew up in this village and we all came to like to jump from this platform in the water. In 2018 we jumped a lot from it. We played with balls and everything, but now you can look, the situation isn't very good. The water went away.
In 2022, NASA said that satellite images showed the lake had lost 7% of its surface area and half of its volume between 1984 and 2020. Fisherman Vancho Vasilevsky says his boat frequently runs aground on the lake.
Сега за 2 месеца се повлечено е во висина 36 сантими. А може да се овие 2-3 дена уште 2-3 сантими намалено. Тоа е. И уште ќе намали. Нема дожд, нема и зима нема, ни снег има, ништо нема. Нема река, една река има само во езерото. Нема дотурна вода и нема... Ова е катастрофа, природна катастрофа.
Environmentalists say lack of rain, evaporation, and overuse of water for irrigation are the main reasons for the water loss. Biologist Dragan Arsovsky says people today are failing to adapt and take action.
Lake Prespa has gone down and up many times in the geological history, and it has survived. A lot of animals, a lot of biodiversity has survived. What is unique now is that we are contributing to this effect of climate change, and also that now the lake is going away, or it is decreasing its water level, but we, the people who are living around there, we do not know how to cope with this because we have gotten used to the lake as it was.
The United Nations Development Program has warned some wildlife species at the lake are at risk of extinction due to the destruction of their habitat through harmful farming practices, erosion, untreated waste, and wastewater. Fruit farm worker Mendy Pandevsky says pesticides are contributing to the problem.
Sevodi, podzemni vodi, vo jezeru i sekad. Tije pesticidi se mnogo opasna работа. За Преспа и тие не се тие билчи што ние ги викате пестициди, ние билчи ги викаме, не се тие што беа порано на времето. Сега може ти обична вода ни продават земјоделците. Им продават на земјоделците. Тоа е све катастрофа. Ништо не е во ред.
The local government has been taking samples to check for the presence of pesticides and chemicals. The results show that in some key areas, the water quality is getting much worse.
When I got a message from the director of the Gulf Coast Bird Observatory that said, "Flamingos, are you going?" To which I replied, "Is that a bar or a restaurant or what is it?" And he goes, No. They found some flamingos in Galveston. And when we got there, we were very surprised. There were no birders at all. It was just fishing guys on the peninsula. And as soon as we walked out, they were right in front of us. In fact, I think of anybody, we got the closest views. We were very lucky.
It's very common, actually, for birds to be carried along with hurricanes. And in fact, among bird watchers in the know, it's very common to go to the coast or otherwise go to see what hurricanes have brought after they've passed.
The food and the atmosphere here reminds me very much of when I was living over there. I was a member of the Bombay Gymkhana Club at the time, and it's very much the same kind of atmosphere. And it's been lovely, but it's such a great shame that I understand we've got to shut. So we'll have to find somewhere else to go.
Well, London is without doubt the global creative capital, and what people are going to see over the next 5 days is incredible creativity, new perspectives on our industry, new business models, new ways of working, and that's why the international crowd continues to come to London. So each day is peppered with independent designers and establishment. Burberry, of course, it's the biggest show of the week. It's our biggest designer brand. Everyone will be looking to Burberry to see what, of course, the creative director Daniel Lee will be producing. To be in London is incredible. It is a fantastic city, a great melting pot of creative industries intertwined. But the cost of rents, the cost of living, the increased costs, the impact of Brexit has, I don't think, ever been any harder. And particularly at this moment in time, it is really difficult for our young designer businesses to get partnership and sponsorship opportunities for their
This is Reuters.